Hi, Facebook friends. Helen Archontou here, CEO of the YWCA of Northern New Jersey. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm integrating that as we go forward after learning from our YWTV yesterday on International Pronouns Day how it is important to share your pronouns and ask for others. Today I have with me Lauren Hersh. Lauren, what are your pronouns?
She, her, and hers.
There you go. We want to model that for all of you so you can start integrating that into your introductions. And when you're on Zoom, you could put it right into your, your name in your little square. Good thing to do. Today, though, our conversation is focused and part of a series that we have launched around a Week Without Violence campaign, which is part of a global movement that YWCAs across the country are participating in this week to raise attention to ending violence against women and girls. This year, the national theme the international theme, I should say, is Beyond Resilience, From Surviving to Thriving. We know for survivors that resilience is central to weathering the mental, physical, and emotional harm of gender-based violence and racism. And we also know that because of the immediate and long-term health impacts of surviving gender-based violence, true resilience really does require recovery, rest, and replenishment. Today, we are, as I said, continuing part of a series that we have curated that's focusing on some of the cases around gender-based violence that have been in the news, very high profile. And we talked earlier this week with Julie Roginski and Sabine Massa, and we talked about the Governor Cuomo case and how we have seen sexual harassment and sexual assault play itself out in New Jersey politics, and what we've done here in New Jersey, thanks to Senator Weinberg and the work group that she has convened to have a very positive impact and really take the lead in our country in putting policies and practices in place to move us to a place where these stories are no longer our current narrative. Today, we are going to look at a whole another conversation, again linked, and I think that one of the pieces to keep in mind in all of these conversations is that there are a lot of places and spaces that gender-based violence pops up in, it's important to be able to understand that it's just not cookie cutter in one way, but there are pieces, despite where it presents itself, that are that weave themselves through all of the cases. And so today we are going to be talking a little bit about human trafficking, and we have Lauren Hersh here with us to talk about that in more detail. So let me tell you a little bit about Lauren. For those of you who are new to her, she is not new to us. We are longtime friends and colleagues, and I'm so grateful that she could take the time to be with us today. She has really made this the focus of her life's work, and she is a founder and national director of World Without Exploitation. She is a lawyer, an activist, a speaker, a writer, and she's also a mother and a wife and a daughter, and lots of other roles where this is so important to her in terms of her work. She has really focused on combating violence against women and young people in everyday life, online, and also in her work in the legal arena. Her passion for these issues started when she was at Kings County District Attorney's office, and where she prosecuted a wide range of cases that were impacting women and girls. At that point, she realized that sex trafficking cases were going unrecognized, and she led the charge to create one of the first sex trafficking units in the United States. She moved into the nonprofit world in 2016, where she co-founded, as I shared, the National Coalition World Without Exploitation to end human trafficking and sexual exploitation. She is also a creator of the Teen Leadership Initiative, a high school program that has engaged young activists in the fight. She is a regular locally in Bergen County, supporting the zone and the work at Bergen Family Center, and kind of getting in there one-on-one. So her her work is both on the one-on-one level and also on the national scope. Just shows her ability to kind of jump into any space and her commitment to this work. Today, her speaking platform, Unsilence, also takes her around the world to engage deeply with young people, parents, and educators and professionals around these tough issues. And I also am excited to share that she is one of our Walking the Talk Gala honorees this year, November 10th. You can join us to honor Lauren and the tremendous body of work that she has done in this place. And we're so excited for that as well. Welcome, Lauren.
Me too. Thank you so much, Helen. I need to shorten that bio. It is long.
You worked hard for it. You do not shorten it. You just soak it all in, lady. That's what I always tell people.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. I'm so happy to be in conversation with you. I think this is a really important topic. And so there's nobody I would rather be having this conversation with than you, because I think together, we're keeping our eye on New Jersey, and we're also keeping our eye nationally, and there's a lot of work to do. So, and I know there are a lot of people that you're working with at the YWCA that are on the ground, really trying to make a dent in all of these issues. So thank you so much for your leadership.
Well, so much to talk about, so let's jump in. And I'm thinking, we've had conversations on YWTV now since we've launched this platform around this issue. Our New Jersey coalition against human trafficking. We've had many guests come on and talk about it. But in case someone's joining us today that is still maybe not clear about what human trafficking is, because I think, very often what happens, and we both know this, is people have a vision of what it is that might be this part of it and not this piece of it. So can you just, give us that context before we jump into the conversation?
Sure. So human trafficking is, it's a huge issue. And when we are talking about human trafficking, we're talking about labor trafficking, we're talking about sex trafficking, we're talking about trafficking of organs. But for our purposes, I think we're going to stay laser focused on sex trafficking, just because that's really my area of expertise. Not to say that there are not serious issues with human trafficking as a general crime, but I want to really identify and define sex trafficking for you, because I think it'll really frame our conversation. So sex trafficking is when a commercial sex act is induced through force, fraud, coercion, and this part's really important, or a position of power and position of vulnerability. And I know we're going to talk about R. Kelly, and that's why I think it's so critical that we're really being laser focused on that position of power and position of vulnerability, because that really is the through line in all of these cases, and very much so in this R. Kelly case.
So, you helped frame for us a little bit about who is, most at risk, of these cases. But let's just dive into that a little bit further. When we think about a human trafficking victim and a human sex trafficking victim, what do they look like?
So here's the reality, and what we know to be true. Anybody can be a victim of sex trafficking, but there are we know that there are populations that are disproportionately impacted, and what we've seen across the country, it's interesting. When I first started doing this work, what I thought we were going to see is foreign-born victims in faraway places who are being smuggled over international borders. But that's just not that exists. Yes. But that is not the majority of cases that we have seen nationally in New Jersey, and specifically in Bergen County. And so who is targeted for sex trafficking tends to be women and girls of color who are poor, and LGBTQ plus youth. So what we're talking about are populations where there's significant vulnerability, and where a sexual predator can come in, can use coercive tactics, and ultimately prey on those vulnerabilities. And so we also recognize that at the other end of that spectrum, we're recognizing that those who are really fueling sex trafficking are the buyers, the sex buyers, who tend to be, not all, but tend to be men with disposable income, many of whom are white. So what we have really is an issue of inequality, racial inequality, gender inequality, and income inequality.
Yes, and I appreciate you kind of sharing the stereotypic image of who is sex trafficked and what this issue is, and kind of dispelling that myth for us. I know that, for those of us that are living, in New Jersey and in northern New Jersey, we've had a lot of very, high profile cases hit our local press. So, if we've been watching, we know that it's happening right here, right in our communities, for sure. And, I know, as I shared in the introduction, Lauren has been key in, working boots on the ground with youth in our community to educate them.
Yeah. Well, Helen, if I can, just for a second, jump in. I actually started doing that work because Liz Corsini, who we both know and love, is a leader in the community, and we connected. I was speaking at an event, and this was many years ago, and she thought, this is happening in my community. And so Liz, being Liz, said, will you come in and will you start working with the young people in our community? And my response was, yes, of course. And pretty quickly, I actually think day one, I had a young person who came up to me who said, I was approached by somebody at the Ben and Jerry's in Englewood, and when I started digging and unpacking the situation, it just didn't sit right with me. And so we contacted the authorities. They looked into it, and it turns out it was a significant trafficker in New Jersey, and we were able to actually prevent that exploitation from happening. I'm sure it would have happened, because I think what was happening was that young person was being recruited and groomed slowly, which is typically how the process worked. It's not I think, like, people think sex trafficking, the movie Taken, somebody's snatched, somebody's kidnapped. That's not usually what it looks like. It's usually a more gradual process. You see that in the R. Kelly case, right? Young people were identified, said, come hang out with me. And there was a grooming process that happened in many of those situations with many of those victims.
Yeah, and I'm so glad that you shared that story, because obviously I'm aware of it, and I think it speaks so much to why these prevention efforts need to be happening. Because if you hadn't had that conversation, and if organizations like Bergen Family Center and the YWCA of Northern New Jersey and others, that are creating space for these conversations, if that wasn't happening, if school districts weren't open to these conversations, if parents, weren't allowing their, children to sit and hear them, we're putting our youth at risk by not understanding and not knowing what to look at, and having a good vision of what to keep an eye out for.
Yeah, it's interesting because, I spent the beginning decade of my career as a prosecutor, prosecuting these cases, and kind of the big takeaway for me, and I spent a lot of time running out to crime scenes, pulling 12-year-olds out of brothels or out of the arms of pimps who the victim thought was their boyfriend, and I got to a point where I thought, this is just purely exhausting. Yes, response is important, but prevention is everything. And so that's why the work that we were doing at the Zone and Bergen Family Center and in schools has been so vital, because what we're really doing, that the point of all of that work is to make sure that we don't ever get to that place of prosecution, because we're preventing these crimes from happening.
Yes, and that is the goal. And I share that because for those of you watching, when we look at where we spend our money, from, a government perspective and funding programs, making sure that initiatives for prevention are funded. And when you're making donations to organizations, really thinking about targeting donations into prevention efforts and education efforts like these are not wasted dollars. I mean, very often we put so much money in the after effect, but if we put some upfront in prevention, we really would minimize and bring down the number of cases for sure. So, you mentioned the R. Kelly case. That was one of the cases that, specifically led us to wanting to have this conversation today. And, for those that are regular at, with YWTV, know that today is when we normally share the mic now with Black women in our community, to elevate their voices. But we felt it was important to have this conversation today, too, because we know statistically the numbers, are really pointed from a racial disparity in terms of who's impacted, from this conversation. So we wanted to lift it up. So let's talk a little bit about the R. Kelly case. I mean, it's been for, months, almost, year plus now, in the news on and off. How does that relate to this conversation that we're having today? To be able to, educate those who are watching it, they may not get the nuances.
Yeah. So, here we are, we're talking about sex trafficking, we're talking about sexual abuse, we're talking about the intersections of all of those pieces, right? Sexual abuse being sort of this big, wide umbrella, sex trafficking being a portion of, one aspect of sexual abuse. R. Kelly really covered the gamut. He was, the most prolific serial sexual abuser on pretty much every level. I mean, and when we think about the tactics that R. Kelly used, it's literally like he took the plays right out of the Predator playbook, right? I think that there was some line about that in the summation, and ultimately led to his conviction with a number of counts, including sex trafficking. But we see the recruitment, we see grooming, we see tactics of isolation, of serious abuse, of insane amount of control. When we look at sort of position of power, here you have this huge celebrity who's going after women and girls mostly, targeting them, preying on their vulnerabilities, flying them in, promising them all sorts of things, and then just massive amounts of manipulation, horrific sexual abuse. And this is sort of the quintessential, kind of like Jeffrey Epstein. This is like the quintessential situation of sexual abuse and sex trafficking, quite frankly.
Yes. And I'm also thinking about the Marilyn Manson case also is another area where we have seen, victim after victim come forward and share stories of not only what they've endured, with the allegations against Marilyn Manson, but how, they were passed around in his circle.
It's so interesting because the other piece of this that I think we can't not talk about is, as he is this R. Kelly and Marilyn Manson and Jeffrey Epstein, yes, are these serial sexual predators, but also they were serial silencers. And that's really that's how this all happens, right? There's a secrecy, there's an isolation, there's a, you can't tell people, cut people off from their friends and family. And so this all kind of happens over time. And it's important to note that R. Kelly was not operating alone, right? He would send his entourage to do some of the dirty work and to recruit, to try to get the tapes, to silence. And so oftentimes when we're looking at trafficking cases, that exploiter is not operating alone.
Yes. And so important to look at that from that perspective. So, we talked about, I mean, obviously these cases are in the news. And of course, I also want to say, I know this conversation may be triggering to anyone watching who is a survivor themselves. Please know that our 24-hour hotline at Healing Space is available for you to call, 201-487-2227. We know that when these cases are in the news, all over social media, everywhere, the positive of that is that, the word gets out so that people understand that this is happening, in so many places and spaces. But we also are very aware that it can be overwhelming for survivors to be bombarded with, with stories that are triggering for them and for their experience as well.
Yes, 100% to all of that. But what we also know is that for many of the survivors of R. Kelly and other survivors, once they have sort of gone through that healing process, not for everybody, but it can be incredibly empowering to speak truth. And I think what we've heard from some of those survivors of R. Kelly and others, and we work at World Without Exploitation with a lot of survivors, that once they've gone through that long and very difficult process of healing, for some, it can be remarkably empowering to speak truth and also help guide what good policy looks like, what good legislation looks like. And we're doing a lot of that work with survivors at World Without Exploitation.
Yes, yes. And I mean, quite frankly, we all know that, hearing someone else's story very often is the gateway to someone being able to, feel some safety to pursuing healing for a story that they may have been keeping, within themselves all this time. So, Lauren, I would be remiss in letting us leave our time together today without talking a little bit about what are signs and symptoms that people can look for. I mean, obviously, again, cases like R. Kelly or Marilyn Manson or Jeffrey Epstein, we're seeing on the news, but these are happening, and they're with celebrities, but these instances are happening every day around us. What are things that signs and symptoms that people can look for to be able to help be part of a prevention effort here? And what are some of the resources? And obviously, we know Healing Space is one of them. World Without Exploitation is another. Where should they be going to get some support? And for our viewers, we have the link here for you to go to World Without Exploitation's website so you can learn more about Lauren and her work there. And of course, we also have the hotline here for you for Healing Space in case we can provide any support for you as well.
So there are so many signs. And so I'll just sort of tackle a few using the R. Kelly case as a way in. We saw a spike in isolation with a lot of those women and girls. We saw a change in behavior. Now, today, 2021, so much is online. And so if you're a parent or a grandparent or you have a young person in your life, I think we've got to be really vigilant about keeping an eye on social media accounts, because I think very often we get a lot of clues about what's going on in their lives. Any sort of self-harm is obviously a very significant red flag. And also some school activity. If you have a student who's, for a very long time been doing really well and then just sort of plummets, I think we've got to sort of dig into what's going on. That's not necessarily that person is a sex trafficking victim, but certainly it signals that there's stuff that needs to be unpacked and that young person needs some help. So where can people go for help? So at World Without Exploitation, so we're a national coalition. We're designed to combat human trafficking and sexual exploitation. But what we do is we work with more than 200 organizations from around the country. Many of those organizations are survivor-led, and so many of those organizations are extraordinary resources in communities, just like in your community, Helen. So at World Without Exploitation, we can make referrals to you. of course, the Healing Space, amazing, Bergen Family Center, the Zone, and of course, reaching out to you, to your organization, to get connected to other resources.
Well, and we're so lucky to have such strong local resources in Bergen County and in northern New Jersey, and having national programs like yours and national hotlines that are out there to be able to filter any survivors directly to support. And that's whether it's just for you to have some mental health and emotional support, or whether you want to pursue reporting a crime. We can help connect you where you need to be. If you're feeling you want to pursue either. Lauren, I'm so grateful that you could take some time today to talk with us. And I'm thinking too, as you mentioned social media and all the online opportunities for that children are engaged in. And I'm thinking about my kids that are 8, my twins, and I know yours are older than mine, but still young. I just want to make sure that we are kind of saying this out loud for parents, that still at these ages, this is something you should be worried about and watching. Could you just speak to that a little bit? Because I do think sometimes, we want to think, oh, we don't have to worry about this yet. This is coming later.
Mm-hmm.
But now is something to worry about too.
100%. So I know people, when they think of online recruiting, they think of social sites like Instagram and Snapchat, but we also know that predators are on all of these gaming sites. And we have really young kids who are very often on gaming sites where they're able to interact with people that they don't know. I think we have to be really mindful of those settings, of limiting those settings, especially with very young people, and then making sure that even at the earliest ages, we're educating people that when they're interacting with people they don't know, that person could say they're one person, but really be another person. And so I am a huge proponent of making sure that we're having candid conversations with students, with parents, with educators. I really think that it's just the truth. Some kids are not getting this information at home. And so I think that schools have an obligation to make sure that our young people are getting this candid conversation and are being made aware of just the realities of being online. Because here's the truth. In 2021, most of our kids are online in some way or another.
They are. And if after this year alone, if they weren't before, they were definitely pushed to become very comfortable with being online from a very, very young age. We had pre-K and kindergartners that were navigating Zoom accounts, folks. So, we really need to be preparing and watching. And, as parents, it's important for us to make sure that our boards of education, are aware that these are conversations we want to have happening to support our children and keep them safe. So please make sure, and we'll also put, we have the link here for World Without Exploitation, and obviously you have the YWCA link here. We'll also put the New Jersey Coalition Against Human Trafficking link for you in the comments. And you should be able to reach out to any of these organizations, because they all work locally here in New Jersey or anywhere around the country to be able to support providing curriculum and providing, wonderful, trainers and leaders like Lauren, to come in and facilitate conversations, both for the staff, and the educators and the parents, as well as directly for the children and youth in our communities. These are really important conversations. If you're in a Girl Scout troop or a Boy Scout troop, or, it's not too young. We really have to be pushing these conversations younger, so that, by the time Lauren is talking to the teenagers, over in programs like Bergen Family Center, that it's not the first time, these concepts are being introduced to them. There's absolutely a way to developmentally appropriately share information so that children can grow up understanding these boundaries and where to go for help and support if they are approached.
Totally. Thank you so much. I'm so glad we touched upon that, Helen. It's so important. It is so important. I agree with you. If we're having the conversations with teens and that's the first time they're getting the information, it is just today in 2021, just too late.
Absolutely. So, folks, I'm sure you understand why we're honoring Lauren at our gala this year. She is, has really is such a leader in this work, and locally here in our community has made such an impact with the relationships and trainings and boots on the ground work that she's done. And so we hope that you can join us to honor her on November 10th. At our virtual gala. It doesn't matter where you're sitting in the world, you can beam in now thanks to technology, and we'll put the link here for the gala so that you can join us. For anyone who's interested in joining this evening, our Healing Space program, our sexual violence program, has a coffee house for survivors. It is virtual at 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. We can get you the link for that, which we will put right here also for you, so anyone can join, especially if you're feeling triggered by this conversation and want a safe space tonight to be able to share what's going on. Obviously the hotline is there for 24/7 anytime, but we do have this event this evening, and we hope that you continue to follow our Week Without Violence initiatives that we are rolling out this week. Lauren, thanks so much for taking the time to be with us today. And to all of our viewers, again, you're part of the mission of YWTV, which is to really educate and elevate and inspire important conversations. Think about something you heard today and integrate it into a conversation you're having with somebody. Take this broadcast, share it on your Facebook page, send it in Messenger to someone that you wish had heard it, send it in a text. It is really important to get this information out there. It actually saves lives.
Thanks so much for having me, Helen.
Thanks, Lauren. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.